Hey guys, it's me again. And today we're going to talk about fear. Woo! But first we're going to breathe. So let's take 3 deep breaths together real quick, and then I'm actually going to let you ground yourselves because I know you can. But let's breathe together. 3. So now I'm going to suggest that you pause the video for a second and ground yourself. So practice using all 5 senses. What are you feeling? What are you seeing? What are you hearing? What are you smelling? What are you tasting? Drop into your senses. Get a good feeling for that. Feel yourself on your chair. Feel your feet on the floor, whatever it is. Your back on the bed, wherever you are. But I want you to do it yourself because the part of the point of this is I'm suggesting lots of different tools to you and offering different ways of thinking about things and perspectives. But the idea is for you to then take that on and make it your own and figure out how it's going to work for you. I know how it works for me, but you need to figure out how it works for you. So, and that takes practice, right? Practice doing it yourself. So turn the video off for a minute, please. Practice grounding, being with yourself for a sec, and then come back and we'll talk about fear. Okay, so well done on the grounding. And we're going to talk about fear. So obviously, this crisis is offering us a lot of opportunities to play with our fear. And I use that term play very intentionally. The more that we can think about any of these practices that I'm suggesting or that I've been sharing with you, the more that we can think of them as a game that we're playing with ourselves, the less daunting it's going to be, right? The easier it is, right? And the whole point of all of this is to find a way to move more easily through challenging times, through anything that, through any sort of adversity. How can you be the mountain in the storm? That's the point of this, right? That's where you want to hopefully get to. And there's a lot more you can get to too, which, maybe we'll have time to get into that as well. But it starts here, right? It starts with figuring out how to manage anxiety and fear. And though that ability to do that then will lead you into other places. Okay. So fear. The way that I you can think of this as a game, like a game of detective, right? You first have to identify what fears you have, and then think about how it is that you react to your fears now versus how you might want to respond to them differently, keeping in mind the discussion we had yesterday about reaction versus response. So you react to something, it's almost an unconscious knee-jerk reaction, and a response is a more thoughtful reaction to something, right? That you are taking a moment, a beat, a breath, at least, before you act, or before you say anything, or before you send that text, right? Okay, so the first part of this is figuring out what it is that you fear and what sort of effect those fears have on you. And different types of fears are going to have a different effect on you. You are going to respond or react to those fears, to different fears differently. So right now we have a lot of the fear that's engendered by this crisis is going to be stuff that's very primal, right? It's about that Maslow's hierarchy of needs. It's about food, clothing, shelter, safety, well-being, the well-being of loved ones. I mean, this is the real stuff. And it's real stuff that brings up real fear. How do you react to that? Do you get angry? Do you get sad? Do you take a swan dive into your freezer for the Ben and Jerry's? Do you try to control as much as you can? Do you become controlling? Do you maybe start manipulating situations as much as you can? Maybe ones that don't even have any relation to the situation because you can't control that. So you try to control everything else, right? Do you check out? Do you just distract yourself? What is it that you do? How do you do this, right? And any of those distractions, anything that you do like that, any of those reactions that I just mentioned are all things that are absolutely natural reactions to fear. But they're also things that only put it off for a little bit. They push it away. They don't actually help you deal with it. It's one of those things that helps you deal with something in the moment, right? But not over the long term. It doesn't teach you anything. It doesn't help you figure out how to deal with this or with something something even greater if it happens. So talking about different kinds of fears, right? So there's the fear that something bad's going to happen. There's the fear of lack. I won't have enough. I won't have enough money. I won't have enough food. I won't have enough toilet paper or whatever it is, right? Fearing loss or abandonment. And that can include emotional abandonment. So that could mean somebody's with you, but they're not emotionally available to you. And that can be threatening and can cause fear in us, right? Fear of pain and death. Fear of judgment of others. These are just a few that I sort of came up with when I was kind of brainstorming about this before I started the video. And then I went back and I wanted to think about, okay, what are some examples from my own life that I can give you to really make this concrete and to think about it, right? So for instance, if you fear something bad happening, like for instance, the other night, I've allowed Vivian to stay with a particular set of friends to see them, small set, because they were all in school together and they've all been with each other this whole time. So that's how I've dealt with this a little bit, to allow her to see some friends, but in a very small way, right? Well, apparently her phone died. So I couldn't get in touch with her for several hours. And I became fearful, right? And when she finally did get home and I was able to, by that time I'd gotten mad, right? I was angry, right? So that's an example of, so I feared, I knew intellectually that something probably she was fine and that her phone had probably gone dead. But that didn't stop me from having an emotional reaction, and that fear bred anger in me in that particular case, right? So then, fearing lack, right? So if you fear lack, what do? Maybe you spend, right? You hoard things, right? That's what a lot of people have done in response to this crisis, right? They have spent a lot of money. They've gone out and hoarded toilet paper and hand sterilizer and other things and food out of fear, right? That they won't have enough, or that they'll get stuck, or that something will happen, right? And then they won't have what they need. So that's one response. If you fear loss or abandonment, like, I have in my past, I'll hold my hand up, when I fear, say, losing a partner or being abandoned, I might become a little manipulative. I might try to manipulate a situation to try to keep them around. I might have what I like to think of as oozing boundaries, instead of holding tight to the stuff that I know is good for me and that I want. I might begin to compromise stuff because I'm afraid of being alone, right? I might cross that boundary. I might say, I don't actually need that because I don't want to take a chance on losing someone, right? Even if maybe that person isn't right for me, right? So that can be a fear reaction. And that's the doorbell right now, which is really helpful because I have no idea how to pause this video. And so my dog is now going to go crazy for a little while. So we're just going to keep going because that's what we do. We just keep going, right? So another thing that sometimes when we feel abandoned, another reaction that we can have to that fear is we might push the other person away, right? We might become really critical of them and start pushing them away because we fear they're going to leave us, right? And then fearing judgment of others. So that's another one that a lot of us often have, and one maybe we don't really recognize or think about too much. But what can happen there a lot of times, and I know I've certainly had this experience myself, is that if you fear what other people think of you, you might start changing what you do in response to that. So you might stop being true to yourself and to what you know is right for you and the path that you know is right for you, because other people are telling you it's not right, and other people are judging you and finding you wanting. And we, a lot of us fear that we're not good enough. And so if other people start telling us, oh, wow, yeah, that's not, you're not doing something right, even if we know it's the right thing for us, we might begin to compromise on that out of fear, right? So what I want you to do is I want you to start to pay attention when you're feeling fearful, right? When you're feeling anxious, when you're scared, and try to identify first, okay, what am I fearing right now? Am I fearing something bad happening? Am I fearing pain? Am I fearing the loss of someone? Am I fearing lack? Am I, what is the fear that I'm having right now? And then begin to identify, okay, what's my response to this, right? Do I dive into the Ben and Jerry's? Do I go spend money that maybe I shouldn't be spending right now? What is it that I do? What pattern do I fall in? Do I begin to compromise on things that I know I need emotionally? Or the things that I know I need to do for myself in order to assuage that fear at that moment? Do I become angry? And if I become angry, how do I become angry, and what happens? Allowing yourself to observe that. And again, this is more another way of sort of cultivating the witness. You're beginning to observe your fear, right? You're beginning to see patterns. So the detective in you is beginning to detect patterns in your fear to see what it is that you do. What patterns do you fall into when you're confronted with fear? And then you can begin to decide, okay, this is how I normally react to fear. This is what I do. How could I respond differently? What could I do differently? So for instance, in the case of Vivian and the phone, now, to some degree, there's a little bit, I felt a little bit legitimate there. I'm like, your friends don't have chargers. You couldn't plug in a phone for a few minutes so that you could just let your mom know. But I didn't have to raise my voice, right? I could convey to her the things that needed to be different next time, right? For her safety, as well as for keeping me from going nuts. But I didn't have to raise my voice. I didn't have to get angry. I could have just, backed down and said, okay, this is what we need to do differently next time. Okay. And that's an example, right? So, or, if I'm headed for the freezer to pull out the ice cream, maybe I can just wait for a minute and say, okay, I know I'm going for that comfort distraction because I'm feeling scared, and that's going to make me feel better for a minute. But then I also know that in a couple of hours, I'm going to feel pretty gross. One, because I will have ingested a whole bunch of sugar, which is going to not make me feel very good. And two, then I'm going to start feeling bad, right? I'm going to start beating myself up for having done that, right? So what's another option? The first thing that I would say is figure out, again, what your patterns are. What is your pattern of distraction? How do you distract yourself from your fear? Because that's really what you're doing, right? In any of these things, in any of these cases, you are distracting yourself from your fear, either by trying to control something else, by becoming angry and pushing that fear away out on somebody else, by, throwing out criticisms, by beginning to ooze your boundaries, by compromising things that you need, whatever it is that you're doing, right? It's all a distraction. So the suggestion is then, all right, now I've begun to see what my patterns are. I see what I'm fearing, and I see what my pattern is here. Can I sit with it for a beat? Can I just sit with it? I don't even know what my response might be, but can I sit with it for however long? And whether that's you just delay by 2 or 3 minutes, sending a text, eating the ice cream, blowing up at somebody, whatever it is, even if you can just observe it for a minute. As you begin to practice this, you will get better at it, and you can pull that time out, right? You can begin to give yourself that space, again, that space where the witness can watch what's going on and you have a moment where maybe something else comes up that you think, oh, I could do that, you know? Or maybe I just sit with my fear for a little while and I just observe it and I feel it and I figure out where it is in my body and look at what it makes me think. What are the thoughts that I'm having while I'm sitting here being scared of whatever it is, right? Because you will then become acquainted with fear and you will see how you will observe how it works through your body. And you will then be able to use some of the tools that we've been talking about, right? Then you can breathe. Then you can ground. Then you can watch that space. Then you can watch the thoughts. And that will help you understand where your fear is really coming from and how it is that you could respond differently. And maybe responding differently is simply not responding at all. It's just being with it and saying, okay, I'm scared right now. And I have some legitimate reasons to be scared. But that doesn't mean that I have to distract myself. And it doesn't mean I have to stop doing something, or I have to start doing something that's maybe not something I really want to do, you know, in the long run. So that's my first that's my first invitation to you in this game, is to stop, figure out what your patterns are, and allow yourself some space to just sit with your fear. Sit with it for a little while, as long as you can. And if that's 30 seconds, it's 30 seconds, right? This is practice. It's not something you're going to get perfect at overnight. Now, I'm not perfect at it. You know, I'm a work in progress. I'm working on this too. And remember also that your fear, that when you engage in these distractions, your fear feeds that dynamic, right? So if your fear can feed your anger if you allow it to. Your fear can feed your sadness. It can feed your anxiety. It can feed your feelings of inadequacy, right? If you don't stop and observe it and allow it to pass. Because it, like all things, will pass, right? And the other thing that I think, another possible response to it, right, is that in this time now, there's, you know, an awful lot of other people in need. And so if there's anything that we can do to be helpful to another person, that is certainly a way to deal with our own fear, right? To take that energy, because it is a form of energy, and put it to another use. So, I mean, I'm just thinking, like, you know, what does the suicide hotline need more volunteers right now? Which they may well, because if you think about it, anybody that's got mental illness and that's now forced into isolation, that can be really dangerous for people who are seriously depressed, for instance. So, you know, maybe you could volunteer on the suicide prevention hotline. Maybe you could just call an elderly neighbor and see if there's something that you can do for them. You know, there's likely to be something that you can do. Go mow a neighbor's yard. That'll keep you, I mean, you're not getting within 6 feet of them, right? But, you know, if somebody's not able to do something for themselves and you are, that's something that you can do to deal with your fear. Another thing that I know can be helpful is that when we're feeling really fearful, if you can take that space, another thing to do is to begin to think of the things that you're grateful for, right? To begin to think of the things that you're thankful for, because that can help switch that dynamic too. You're like, okay, I'm really scared of this, but you know what? I'm grateful for this. And you'll also begin to realize that a lot of the things that you're fearing, they're not here. They're not here right now. It's not happening right now. This is something that your mind is playing with you on, right? This fear hasn't materialized. It's something you're projecting into the future and creating for yourself. So maybe you can find a way to stop doing that if you become aware of it, right? We have to become aware of it. If we're letting all this stuff happen subconsciously, then we're not going to be able to get a handle on it. So that's where I will leave you. Figure out what you fear. figure out what your reaction patterns are, what distractions you engage in. Try to sit with it. See if you can figure out where it is in your body. See if you can figure out what your reaction is. See if there's a different response you could have to it. Even if it's just giving yourself a little bit more space before you do something in reaction to it. And then, potentially, figure out if there's something, a way that you can flip that energy into positive motion. What can you do? You know, what can I do? That's sort of the theme of these videos. Like, what can I do? So this is what I'm doing. One of the things that I'm doing. What can you do? We can all do something. We all have some gift that we can offer another person, especially in this time. And even if that's just calling up friends that you know may be vulnerable and allowing them some space to talk, you know, that could be it. That could be it too. So I will leave you with those thoughts, and I hope that's helpful. And we will talk more about fear. And I also want to start talking about some positive stuff too. I don't want it to all be this sort of dirge of negativity and stuff like that. That's you know, that's not life anyway. So my best to you, sending love, thinking of you, and I'll see you soon. Bye.